Ladies and gentlemen, the biggest misunderstanding about avoidance is the fantasy that there is one magical person who cracks the code and becomes their forever bond. That idea is romantic, but it's incomplete. Because for most avoidants, forever isn't unlocked by a single perfect face. It's unlocked by a specific emotional environment their nervous system can finally trust. And when you understand this, you stop chasing the myth of being the chosen one through performance, and you start focusing on becoming the kind of love that feels safe to stay close to. An avoidant doesn't attach forever to the loudest love, the most intense love, or the love that sacrifices itself the hardest. They attach to the love that doesn't feel like a trap. Their nervous system is wired to scan for pressure. Pressure can look like emotional urgency, chronic conflict, unspoken expectations, or even the subtle energy of someone who needs them to be okay. So when a relationship starts feeling like an emotional job, even if the love is real, they begin to back away. Not because you are too much as a person, but because the relationship feels like too much responsibility for their capacity at that time. That's why the forever person is often less about charisma and more about emotional pacing. The environment that creates long-term bonding for an avoidant is one that carries warmth without chaos. It resembles safety with structure. It allows closeness without emotional flooding. It respects autonomy without slipping into coldness. The avoidant learns through experience that love here does not mean losing themselves. Love here does not mean failing someone's expectation. Love here does not mean constant emotional performance. And that is what finally softens the long-held defensive reflex. This is where many people make the mistake of trying to out-love avoidance with intensity. They offer more reassurance, more explanations, more availability, thinking that consistency will be created by effort alone. But to an avoidant nervous system, intense pursuit can feel like invisible debt building in the background. The more you try to secure the bond through urgency, the more they fear the bond will eventually demand more than they can give. So they retreat to regain control of their internal state. The environment becomes emotionally loud, even if your intentions are tender. And for an avoidant, emotional loudness is often interpreted as danger. So what does the safe environment look like in reality? It looks like a partner who can love deeply without collapsing. Someone who can say, "I care about you," while also living a full life that does not shrink around the relationship. Someone who is clear about needs but not frantic about them. Someone who doesn't punish space, but also doesn't reward disappearing acts with instant full access. Someone who remains compassionate while holding standards. That combination is rare, and it's exactly why it becomes unforgettable to a growth-ready avoidant. Because the avoidant who is capable of healthy long-term bonding doesn't want to be chased into intimacy. They want to feel safe walking into it. They don't want to be pressured by someone else's anxiety. They want to experience love as an invitation, not a demand. And when you embody that energy, you're not just attractive, you're regulating. You become the relationship where their nervous system doesn't have to brace for the next emotional storm. This also explains why it sometimes looks like avoidance, bond forever, with someone who isn't even the most dramatic love of their life. The forever bond often appears with the person who is emotionally stable in ordinary days, not just passionate in high moments. The person who knows how to repair without turning every conversation into a courtroom. The person who doesn't require the avoidant to prove love every time fear shows up. The person who understands that intimacy doesn't have to be a constant test of devotion. Over time, that stability becomes the new definition of love in the avoidant's body. And this is where your self-respect becomes a secret ingredient of safety. Because self-respect doesn't threaten a healthy avoidant. It calms them. It tells them they are not responsible for holding your entire emotional world together. It tells them that your love is strong enough to exist without desperation. It tells them the relationship can be built on mutual effort instead of one person carrying the emotional weight. That is what transforms fear-based distance into secure closeness. So the first keynote is not asking you to become someone else. It's asking you to stop trying to be the exception through self-abandonment. The forever environment is not built by chasing, proving, or shrinking your needs until you disappear. It's built by steady love with clear boundaries, by warmth with structure, by closeness that doesn't demand the loss of identity. And when an avoidant finally experiences that kind of environment, the internal story begins to change. Love stops looking like pressure, it starts looking like peace. Because in the end, the one person an avoidant bonds with forever is usually the one who doesn't try to win them with intensity. It's the one who quietly creates an emotional home where autonomy and intimacy can breathe in the same room. And when you become that kind of love, you don't just increase your chance of being chosen. You protect your heart, your dignity, and your future, no matter what they decide. Ladies and gentlemen, The second rare truth is one that changes how you interpret every silence, every retreat, every sudden cold shift you've ever felt from an avoidant. They don't struggle to attach because they lack emotion. They struggle because closeness can feel like a cost they don't trust themselves to pay. And if you've never been inside that nervous system, you might mistake their withdrawal for indifference, when it's often fear wearing the mask of control. For many avoidants, intimacy isn't just romance, it's risk. The risk of losing autonomy. The risk of being expected to show up emotionally in a way they don't feel skilled enough to maintain. The risk of being responsible for someone else's peace. So when the relationship deepens, the internal alarm doesn't say, "This is love." It says, "This might become too much." And that fear can activate even when they truly care. That's why you can experience stunning warmth one week and confusing distance the next. The feelings don't disappear. Their defenses just get louder. This is where people get trapped in the wrong interpretation. You think, if I love harder, they'll feel safer. You increase reassurance, you increase availability, you increase explanations. You try to become so gentle and perfect that their fear has no reason to exist. But what an avoidant nervous system often hears in that moment is not safety, it's pressure building. It can feel like emotional debt. Like the more you give, the more they'll be expected to return in a way they're unsure they can sustain. So ironically, the more you use intensity to create closeness, the more you can trigger their need to create space. That is why this keynote matters. It reminds you that avoidant withdrawal is often less about your value and more about their internal capacity at that stage of intimacy. The avoidant system is scanning for one question. Will this relationship demand a version of me I don't trust myself to be consistently? If the answer feels uncertain, distance becomes protection. They don't always want to hurt you. They want to avoid failing you. That fear of failing can be so strong that retreat feels safer than trying. Another hard truth is that avoidants often experience emotional urgency as a threat, even when it's presented lovingly. If they sense your stability depends on their immediate reassurance, they may feel trapped by the responsibility. It's not that your needs are wrong. It's that they fear your needs will become an unending role they cannot do perfectly. So they retreat to regain control of their internal state. This is why calm love is so powerful with them. Calm love says, "I want you, but I'm not collapsing without you." That removes the weight that makes closeness feel dangerous. This is also why relationships with avoidance can feel like you're always one step away from finally arriving. Because their fear often turns into delays. They might say they care, but they hesitate to define the relationship. They might show affection, but pull back right after. They might move closer when you detach, then retreat when you lean in. And the anxious heart can misread this as a puzzle to solve. You start working harder to earn stability. But the truth is, stability cannot be earned by self-abandonment. It can only be built when both people have the capacity and willingness to create a secure structure. So what does this teach you about the forever person for an avoidant? It teaches you that forever is not triggered by your perfection. Forever is triggered by an environment that reduces the perceived cost of intimacy. That environment is built by three quiet realities: emotional steadiness, respect for autonomy, and clear standards that don't come with chaos. The person who can become forever in an avoidance world is often someone who doesn't interpret every distance as an invitation to chase. They know how to hold their center. They know how to offer love without turning it into a performance review. They communicate their needs clearly, but they don't flood the relationship with urgency. They create a rhythm that feels breathable. And that rhythm can slowly rewire the avoidance association with intimacy from pressure to peace. But this keynote is also a protection for you, because understanding the cost of closeness fear does not mean you excuse harmful patterns. It doesn't mean you accept disappearing acts without accountability. It doesn't mean you postpone your needs forever. It simply means you stop making their fear a verdict on your worth. You stop internalizing their pacing as proof you are too much. You start recognizing that love requires capacity, not just feeling. So if you're loving an avoidant, the rare emotional wisdom is this: your job is not to reduce yourself to fit their comfort. Your job is to remain warm while holding standards that protect your peace. A growth-ready avoidant will eventually respect that. They will learn to meet you with consistency because your calm boundaries actually make the relationship feel safer. A control-based avoidant will resist that because your standards remove the benefits of ambiguity. Either way, you stop living inside confusion. Because the truth they hide is not that they don't feel deeply. The truth is that deep feeling without safety can feel like danger. And the forever bond is often born when someone shows them that intimacy can be steady, structured, and free enough that love doesn't cost their identity. Ladies and gentlemen, If you want to understand the rare forever trigger for an avoidant, you have to let go of the fantasy that they bond for life with the person who loves the hardest. They don't. They bond for life with the person whose love feels like freedom inside closeness. And that is one of the most misunderstood truths in modern relationships, because most people think safety means more closeness, more reassurance, more constant contact. But for an avoidant nervous system, too much emotional intensity can feel like losing air. Not because you're wrong for wanting love, but because their body has learned a defensive equation: closeness equals pressure, expectation, responsibility, loss of self. So when love starts feeling like an emotional job they must perform perfectly, their instinct is to protect themselves with distance. That is why the rare person an avoidant can bond with forever is not the one who chases their heart through urgency. It's the one who creates a relationship where intimacy doesn't require erasure from either side. The one who can be deeply loving without becoming emotionally dependent. The one who can desire closeness without turning closeness into a demand. The one who can hold boundaries without turning boundaries into punishment. Freedom inside love looks like this: you are warm and you are grounded. You are affectionate and you are not begging. You are emotionally open and you are not emotionally chaotic. You have standards and you don't weaponize them. You're not acting indifferent. You're acting secure. This is what most anxious hearts struggle to understand, because when you love an avoidant, your instinct is to prove you're safe by giving more. More explanations, more patience, more emotional labor. You try to become so perfect that their fear has nowhere to hide. But the avoidant doesn't calm down when you become more available in a desperate way. They calm down when they sense you are stable with, or without immediate reassurance from them. That subtle energy shift tells their nervous system something it rarely hears: you can be close to me without being responsible for my entire emotional balance. That's freedom, and freedom is not the enemy of commitment. Freedom is the foundation of secure commitment for avoidants who are capable of healthy love. So the forever environment is built by a person who doesn't collapse under uncertainty, a person who doesn't shrink their needs to keep access, a person who doesn't hand over their dignity every time someone goes quiet. This person doesn't threaten, chase, or punish. They simply live by a calm emotional truth: I want love that is consistent, and I'm not available for a pattern that destabilizes me. To an avoidant, that is powerful, and if they're growth ready, it is deeply attractive. Because it removes the invisible emotional debt. It removes the fear that your love will become a future obligation they can never satisfy. It turns the relationship into something structured and breathable, not emotionally loud and unpredictable. That's why avoidants can often stay bonded for life with someone who is not the most dramatic partner they ever had, but is the most emotionally steady. And boundaries are the secret weapon here: not rigid walls, but loving lines. A boundary says, I care about you and I care about me. A boundary says, I'm not going to chase a connection that requires me to abandon my self-respect. This doesn't push away healthy avoidance. It creates safety. It tells them closeness isn't a trap because you are not using closeness to control them. You are using standards to protect the relationship from chaos. This is where the paradox becomes beautiful. The more you stop chasing them into intimacy, the more a healthy avoidant may feel safe enough to choose intimacy on their own. Because your energy doesn't feel like a tug of war. It feels like an invitation. Warmth plus boundaries is what transforms an avoidant's internal story about love. Closeness plus self-respect is what teaches their nervous system that intimacy doesn't equal loss of identity. And you can feel this shift in how the relationship moves. Instead of hot and cold cycles, you start seeing consistency, small, reliable steps, clearer communication around space, less fear-based shutdown, more willingness to repair. The avoidant begins to lean in not because you won a psychological battle, but because the emotional environment finally feels safe to stay in. But this keynote also protects you from fantasy, because not every avoidant will respond to this in a healthy way. A control-based avoidant may resist boundaries because boundaries remove the benefits of ambiguity. They may test you with breadcrumbs and guilt and vague affection meant to reopen access without accountability. And your calm standards will reveal that truth faster than any argument ever could. So the rare forever trigger is not you becoming smaller. It is you becoming steadier. It is you choosing a love that does not require you to act like a therapist, a detective, and a rescuer just to receive basic consistency. It is you becoming the kind of partner who can hold love without panic and hold standards without cruelty. And that energy either invites a growth-ready avoidant into their healthiest capacity, or it saves you from a bond that was never built to hold secure love in the first place. Ladies and gentlemen, the fourth keynote is the vulnerability test. And this is where avoidant love either becomes permanent or quietly falls apart without anyone knowing exactly why. Because avoidants don't bond forever with the person who begs for closeness the hardest. They bond with the person who makes vulnerability feel safe enough to repeat, and that safety is rare. Here's the truth. Many avoidants have deep emotions, but they don't trust what happens after they reveal them. The fear isn't only intimacy. The fear is what intimacy might cost them once they open the door. The fear is being judged, pressured, emotionally cornered, or made responsible for a level of reassurance they don't yet know how to sustain. So they learn a survival rule. If I show too much, I risk losing control. If I show too much, I risk disappointing someone. If I show too much, I risk becoming trapped in constant emotional obligation. That is why the first time an avoidant opens up to you is not just a moment. It's a test of the entire emotional environment. They are watching what your nervous system does with their truth. Do you stay calm? Do you make room? Do you respond with steadiness? Or do you turn their vulnerability into a crisis, an interrogation, or a courtroom? Because an anxious, leaning heart can unintentionally punish vulnerability without meaning to, not out of cruelty but out of fear. If an avoidant admits, I need space, the anxious partner may hear, I'm not enough. If the avoidant says, I'm overwhelmed, the anxious partner might respond with urgency, questions, or emotional flooding, trying to fix the moment immediately. And from the anxious perspective, that makes sense. You're fighting for connection. You're trying to secure the bond. But from the avoidant perspective, it can feel like their honesty has triggered pressure and emotional escalation. So what does that teach them? That openness equals chaos. That telling the truth makes the relationship heavier. That vulnerability leads to conflict instead of closeness. And if that lesson repeats, the avoidant becomes quieter, colder, and farther away, not because love died, but because safety did. The person an avoidant bonds with long-term does something different. They don't punish honesty with panic. They don't confuse a request for space with a betrayal. They don't turn every difficult truth into a dramatic rupture. They respond with grounded strength. They can say, thank you for telling me, without collapsing into fear. They can hear discomfort without forcing an instant resolution. They can stay emotionally present without becoming emotionally invasive. This is a rare emotional skill. It's the ability to keep love stable even when the moment is uncomfortable. It's not emotional numbness. It's emotional maturity. Because the avoidant system is not looking for a partner who never needs anything. That's a myth. A healthy avoidant can absolutely love someone with needs. What they struggle with is the energy of emotional volatility, urgency, and the sense that they must perform reassurance perfectly or face punishment. So when you demonstrate that you can hold your need without turning it into a crisis, you become safer than you realize. This keynote is also about how you handle the avoidant's imperfect attempts at closeness. Avoidants often open up in small doses. They may not flood you with vulnerable words. They may not express emotions elegantly. Sometimes their vulnerability is awkward. Sometimes it shows up as a brief admission, a simple confession, a subtle gesture rather than a grand emotional speech. If you reward those small openings with warmth and calm, they learn that closeness with you is not a risk, it's a refuge. But if you respond by demanding more immediately, or analyzing every word, or turning that small opening into a long emotional debrief, you may accidentally teach them that vulnerability is an entry point to pressure. So they stop offering it. The forever bond is built by someone who understands pacing, someone who knows that secure intimacy isn't extracted, it's cultivated. And here's the crucial balance. Not punishing vulnerability does not mean tolerating disrespect. It does not mean accepting emotional disappearance. It does not mean abandoning your standards. The secure version of this keynote is not you becoming endlessly patient with instability. The secure version is you becoming calm enough to hear honesty and strong enough to require consistency. So you might say, respect that you need space, and I also need clarity about when we reconnect. That single line is powerful. It protects your self-respect while honoring their nervous system. It shows you are neither a chaser nor a punisher. You are a steady partner with standards. That is incredibly attractive to a growth-ready avoidant. Because the avoidant who can bond forever is not looking for someone to rescue them from discomfort. They're looking for someone who doesn't turn discomfort into danger. Someone who makes honesty feel safe. Someone whose love doesn't demand perfection, but does require real effort. This is why the vulnerability test is so decisive. It reveals whether the relationship can become secure, because the moment an avoidant realizes that your heart can handle truth without chaos, they begin to trust the possibility of staying. Ladies and gentlemen, the fifth keynote is where the fantasy collapses and the truth finally gives you power. Because if we're talking about the one person an avoidant can bond with deeply and long-term, we have to talk about the biggest silent killer of that possibility. Chasing, not love, not warmth, not honest desire, but chasing energy that turns intimacy into pressure and turns your worth into something you feel you must prove. Chasing is what happens when your nervous system starts treating their closeness like oxygen. You over-explain, you over-check, you over-give. You try to earn consistency with effort. You believe that if you show them enough devotion, enough understanding, enough patience, they'll finally feel safe enough to stay. And your heart means well, your loyalty is real. But the avoidant nervous system often hears a different message than the one you intend. It hears, your availability must regulate me. It hears, if you step back I might fall apart. And for an avoidant who carries a fear of emotional obligation, that message feels heavy. This is why chasing doesn't create forever. It creates a cycle. The more you chase, the more they feel the relationship is becoming an emotional job. The more they pull away, the more you chase again. And over time, you both unknowingly train each other's wounds. You train them to associate closeness with pressure. They train you to associate love with uncertainty. That is not bonding. That is survival. Now here's the rare truth that changes everything. Avoidants who are capable of healthy long-term love do not bond forever with someone who never needs anything. They bond forever with someone who needs love in a clean, steady, emotionally adult way. Someone whose needs don't arrive like a storm, but whose standards are non-negotiable. That's the difference maker. Calm standards. Because calm standards are the opposite of chasing. Chasing says, please choose me. Calm standards say, I care about you, and I require consistency. Chasing is fueled by fear. Calm standards are fueled by self-respect. Chasing makes you emotionally negotiable. Calm standards make you emotionally clear. And this is where a growth-ready avoidant responds differently than a control-based one. A growth-ready avoidant may initially feel uncomfortable with your clarity, because they're not used to a partner who doesn't over-function the emotional workload. But your steadiness actually reduces their internal chaos. Your self-respect removes the invisible emotional debt they fear. Your boundaries communicate something deeply relieving to their nervous system. This relationship will not consume you, and it will not collapse me. So instead of pulling away harder, they begin to rise. Slowly but honestly. They start clarifying their need for space rather than disappearing. They begin offering micro-consistency. They follow through. They repair. They stop relying on ambiguity to protect themselves because your calm structure makes clarity feel less dangerous. A control-based avoidant reacts in the opposite way. Your standards remove their comfort zone. They want access without accountability. They want your warmth without your requirements. So your calm standards feel like pressure not because they're unfair, but because they expose the imbalance. These are the avoidants who often suddenly call you too intense, too serious, or too demanding. The moment you ask for basic emotional reliability, they may breadcrumb, they may pull away. They may attempt to reset you into the old pattern where you compromise your needs to preserve access. And this is why your calm standards aren't just attractive. They're diagnostic. They reveal who is capable of forever and who was only comfortable when you were willing to accept half love. Now let's talk about what calm standards look like in real life, because this is where most people misunderstand the concept. Calm standards are not ultimatums thrown in anger. They're not punishments, they're not games. They are clear emotional boundaries delivered without desperation. It sounds like, I enjoy being with you, and I need consistency if we're building something real. It sounds like, I respect your need for space. I also need clarity about when we reconnect. It sounds like, I'm not available for a hot and cold connection. I'm open to steady effort. These sentences do something powerful. They don't chase them into closeness. They invite them into structure. That's why a healthy avoidant can breathe inside them. Because forever isn't built on the highs of chemistry alone. It's built on the ordinary days. The steady rhythm, the repair after tension, the ability to handle each other's needs without turning love into an emotional scoreboard. This keynote is also where you must stop confusing your patience with a promise of change. Your patience is beautiful, but it cannot replace someone's capacity. A relationship becomes forever worthy when both people can hold the bond with consistent effort, not when one person becomes emotionally smaller to keep the other person comfortable. So the truth is not that you should never care deeply. The truth is that deep love must be paired with deep self-respect. The avoidant who can bond long-term is not looking for someone to chase them into commitment. They're looking for someone whose presence feels safe, whose identity stays intact, and whose standards create a stable emotional home. And when you embody that, you stop trying to be the person who wins them through effort. You become the person who can only be loved well. That is the difference between a connection that burns bright and a connection that actually lasts. Ladies and gentlemen, The sixth keynote is the truth filter ending, the part that turns this entire conversation from a romantic fantasy into emotional reality. Because once you understand what an avoidant bonds with forever, you stop trying to win love through self-erasure and you start building love through self-respect. The rare emotional truth is this: your standards don't scare away real love, they reveal whether love is real. Most people who love avoidance fall into one quiet trap. They start believing that if they just become easier, calmer, smaller, less emotional, less demanding, less human, then the avoidant will finally feel safe enough to stay. And for a short time, that strategy can appear to work. You get the warmth back, you get the texting back, you get the closeness window. But then the cost shows up later. You realize you have been paying for peace with your voice. You have been purchasing connection with self-abandonment. You've been surviving a relationship that only feels stable when you need nothing. That is not a forever bond. That is a temporary truce. The avoidance forever person is not someone who becomes invisible. It's someone who becomes grounded. Someone whose love is warm but not desperate. Someone who can hold boundaries without turning them into punishment. Someone who doesn't weaponize emotions to force closeness, but also doesn't offer endless access to a person who disappears without accountability. That combination is rare, and that's why it becomes the emotional environment an avoidant can actually attach to long-term if they have the capacity for healthy love. This keynote is about the deepest shift in your identity. You stop seeing your self-respect as a threat to the relationship. You start seeing it as the foundation of any relationship worth keeping. Because the moment you begin requiring consistency, clarity, and emotional safety, one of two things happens. A growth-ready avoidant begins to rise. A control-based avoidant begins to resist. And both outcomes are a gift. A growth-ready avoidant may not become perfect overnight. They may still need space. They may still get overwhelmed. They may still struggle to name their needs. But your standards create a safer structure for them. Your calm boundaries reduce emotional chaos. Your clarity eliminates the fog that keeps them defensive. Your full life outside the relationship reduces their fear of being your only emotional regulator. So instead of feeling trapped, they begin to feel relief. They start understanding that love with you doesn't require a loss of self. It requires mutual effort. That is where secure bonding can grow. A control-based avoidant reacts differently. Your standards remove the benefits of the gray zone. They can no longer receive loyalty without providing consistency. They can no longer disappear and return with a simple "hey" and expect full access. They may try to pull you back with guilt, vague affection, or breadcrumbs. They may label your growth as pressure. They may punish your boundaries with distance. But what they're really revealing is simple: the old dynamic worked because you were emotionally negotiable. The truth filter activates when you are no longer negotiable. This is why your self-respect is not just a personal win. It is the ultimate diagnostic tool for the relationship. It answers the question your heart keeps asking in the dark. Is this person capable of building a safe forever bond, or were they only comfortable while I carried the emotional cost? If you want to embody this keynote fully, your standards must be specific. Not dramatic, not cruel, not performative, just clear. You require consistent communication, not constant communication. You require care with space, not secrecy around space. You require repair after rupture, not romance as a distraction from unresolved patterns. You require a defined direction, not ongoing emotional ambiguity. You stop rewarding uncertainty with intimacy. You stop treating chemistry as proof of capacity. And this is the hardest part for emotionally loyal people. You must stop confusing your patience with a guarantee of their growth. Your patience is beautiful, but it is not a contract that obligates someone to become consistent. Someone's capacity is revealed by what happens when you set a healthy standard and hold it without fear. So when you feel tempted to soften your boundaries just to keep the peace, remember what this keynote is teaching you. The purpose is not to win an avoidant. The purpose is to protect your nervous system from being trained to accept half love as a normal lifestyle. The purpose is to create an emotional home that is stable enough for secure love to breathe, and strong enough to end patterns that demand you disappear. The most liberating truth is this: that forever bond is not an award you earn by surviving inconsistency. It's a structure you build with someone who is willing to meet you in steadiness. You don't have to be louder to be chosen. You have to be clearer. You don't have to shrink to be safe. You have to be grounded enough to require the kind of love that doesn't make you doubt yourself every week. And when you carry that energy, you become the rare emotional environment an avoidant can bond with deeply if they are ready. And if they are not, your clarity doesn't break your heart, it saves it.